fell in love with your film the moment I watched it. I've never seen a film about miscarriage before, and I have so many friends that have gone through it, and it's something in my filmmaking circles that we always talk about, like, why isn't there a miscarriage film, and when are we going to make this miscarriage film? And, you know, I also have made films about myself that have been deeply personal that I put out in the world, and I know that's not an easy thing. So why did you decide to make this film?
Yeah, it was like a couple of things came together. Like it happened in 2016, and obviously I was already a filmmaker, so that makes it easy. When something happens to a filmmaker, they might make a film about it. But I didn't initially think that, oh, this is a movie. I got home from the festival and started to tell my story, like, to friends, you know, because some people knew, even though I was only like 7 or 8 weeks pregnant, I had told some friends, and so I had to tell them what happened. And I realized every time I told the story, it was actually kind of funny, you know, like running into Penn and Teller or John Hamm. And I was like, that's some of the stuff that's like, yeah, miscarriages happen while we're living and while we're working and while we're just sitting there. This is this quiet thing that we do. We don't even always know what happens to us. And so the more those conversations went on, I started to like write it as a story. And because when it happened to me, the first night it was happening, I read so many women's stories online. I mean, a lot of them were just like, whatever, Reddit posts, not Reddit, but blog posts and like comments. And it was just, the more iterations of a miscarriage I read about, the better I felt. Because I was like, okay, I didn't do anything wrong. And because you have to get over that feeling. And that, it can go so many different ways, and that there's, you know, just to feel like I was in a community. So I was going to maybe share that writing, like, again, on someone's blog. I have some friends who have writers' blogs and stuff, but that's not normally how I operate. A couple years passed. It's already like 2019, which is when I kind of made the film. And all of a sudden, I just like pictured, I think I opened the document and read the story that I had written. And I pictured the image of like the woman, me, lying in the backyard where you just see my midsection. And that just felt like an artistic representation of like, this is the part of me we're going to talk about. And for some reason, I thought that was interesting to have an interview with a torso. And then it kind of like, I was like, oh, does that make this a film if there are images now? And I went back through my photos from the trip, and I was like, I think I might have enough stuff if I pepper it in with appropriated stuff. And then as I was like playing around with it, that the one last piece that really helped me speed up in making it, that in the summer of 2019, there were like, I forget now, 7 or so states that were all trying to pass different laws against a woman's right to choose, including like Indiana trying to pass a law where you had to like bury the material from a miscarriage, that you had to hold a funeral. And I was just like, no way. And I thought, because I don't have an abortion conversation that's mine other than my opinions. And I was like, but this is like a related, broader way of looking at women's reproductive rights and a woman's right to think about her body and how she has these complicated choices about her own body anyway, despite the laws. And so I thought, well, I'll tell my part of that. And that was a long answer, but.
It's interesting to hear you say that it started out as a story, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was, you have all these little moments like where your head is down and you see the goat's amenity and, you know, just all these specific detailed moments. And I was going to ask you like how you chose that or why you included those. I don't know, it's like, that's when you're processing a trauma, those are the things that you focus on. So it just lends so much to the emotion in the film, and it makes it so much more relatable. So it makes sense now that you started as a short story, right?
Yeah, that's nice to hear. And I think my goal when I started to write was just to write everything I could remember. So every little detail, every feeling. And that included something like that goat, the amenities, goats a moment. That whole moment in that hotel was just so surreal. And it was happening at that time, like it was just about to pass through me. And I just felt so bad. And so I feel like I remember every second of that experience. And as I wrote it down and I went back through my photos, I took a photo. I don't write that into the story, but it's obvious that I must have. Like, I pulled my phone out while my friend was like getting me a room after I had passed the baby or the miscarriage, whatever, the embryo, and I snapped a picture of it because it was so funny to me. I was just like, I need to tell my partner that this is what I was looking at. And like, so maybe that's the filmmaker brain, feeling like those details needed to be recorded in some way. And then the question was, okay, I wrote it down. I remembered it. I wrote it down. Do I include it? And I think my main goal was to be as true to my voice as possible. And my voice tends to go towards showing the absurdity, the mix of like absurdity and reality in all situations. And that was like a perfect moment of being like, why am I thinking about goats? But I'm thinking about goats. And then the person across the counter like can't even really engage me in conversation. Like he's worse at engaging in conversation than I am in the moment.
Yeah.
So
Another thing that really stood out to me is kind of in the beginning of the film where you talk about you're at Slamdance and you're surrounded by all these men. And I guess I don't really have a question about that. It just sort of stood out to me like, yeah, there's so much that women experience that men just cannot possibly understand. And I felt for you so much in that moment because how frustrating to be in this really vulnerable position and not have anybody that's around you. I mean, they can't possibly understand, right?
And there were, and like, that was a really hard part to write because it wasn't meant to be a slight against really technically Slamdance or Sundance, but it has been a broader problem in general that filmmakers show more works by men. And 2016 is the year of Trump got elected that following fall. So we didn't have the women's marches yet. And we didn't have yet that huge, like forced, now it's like every year, Sundance, everybody is just like, we're 47% women and 20% people of color. And they're like, they changed things. They're doing it. It's happening. This was right before that. And so it did feel, and the numbers weren't perfect. Although Slamdance does do pretty well has historically done well with women filmmakers. But it just so happened that there were women there, but like I didn't know any of them. And so the men that I trusted and loved, who I loved, I wanted to tell them what was going on. And I did. But then I was trying to communicate it. I'm like, you just like what it feels like to have a uterus or to bleed, just to bleed regularly in public. It was like blowing my mind that like they have no idea. Like if they cut their finger, they probably would have been like, oh gosh, there's blood in public. And I'm just sort of like, we're walking around with like buckets of blood like all the time. So, yeah, just like you try to do something little and then it just spirals into like, I don't know how to do this here,
Yeah. How did you go about choosing the imagery that you did?
Yeah, so and I think of the imagery in 3 parts, sort of. It's the footage of me in the background becomes kind of like the storyteller part. So there's parts where I'm playing with a microphone and I do a little bit of demonstrating, like I'm wearing the sweater I was wearing when it happened, but then I like take it off. And that just felt, I needed something stable to kind of return to and to bring it back to me. And then I had any video or photos related to me being there. And some of the videos shot by people at Slamdance, and I borrowed, like there's an interview that they shot with me and they let me use that interview, of course, and footage from my film from the time, anything that like I already had. And then there was this third space, actually there's 4 spaces. There was another piece that was just like, I stole pictures of John Hamm from the internet. I don't have any photos of John Hamm. The footage from Hateful Eight and Inside Out, like that. I felt like I had the right to claim these things that made their way into my life, and then I had to like share them back. So very fair use in my mind. And then the fourth part would be, I did shoot some film of just like little interstitial things, like lots of lights and sky, airplanes, and tree branches. It felt like it needed space for observation, like giving the viewer space to listen to me and maybe paint some of their own pictures, and space for me to just like zone out in storytelling. Like I'm not always demonstrating with a laser pointer or something. Like sometimes you're just listening.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my biggest question for you, and the thing that really drew me to this film the most, is like, did it feel very vulnerable making this? How did it feel? How has it felt showing it to people, and what have the reactions to the film been?
When it premiered at Slamdance, which was like amazing, and it premiered in the documentary program too, which like I've made some narratives, I do a lot of things, but I tend to fall into like an experimental category.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure what this was because it's sort of an experimental documentary. We programmed it with documentary, and I mean, it took me like 5 seconds and I started crying during the movie because all the feelings were kind of coming back. And it kind of made me cry to even make myself laugh, like to kind of just go through to purge some of the feelings around it. And the response was really fascinating there, specifically because a lot of people who were there this spring in 2020 were there in 2016, and they would come up to me and say, I had no idea. And I'm like, I know, that's kind of the point. And some people were like, why didn't you say something at the time? And I was like, no, that's the point. Like, there's no way to do it. Like, why would I tell the programmer, like what, and how, and, you also don't even really know what's going on when it's happening. And so it brought up, and lots of women were coming up to me, like older women who said they'd had multiple miscarriages, and the varying degrees of how they happen publicly has become an interesting conversation. What does it mean to do something in public but inside of you? And so, yeah, the conversations have been really good. And yeah, I've just been really touched that it works, and that I guess I was a little afraid in terms of vulnerability that like my voice or my story would be too specific, that someone might be like, I don't care, or I don't know you, so this doesn't really mean anything to me. But I think it proved to me that like the more specific you are, the more doors you can open to like a universal concept, like even men finding their connection, women who haven't had miscarriages, and men finding just a connection in the idea that bad stuff can happen when you're out there, and it's hard to figure out how to talk about it.
Yeah. So what is your hope for the film moving forward? I know you talked a little bit about what it's like having this experience in your body, and how miscarriage has become this public political discourse. And so are you hoping to sort of lend to that voice, or what's your goal with it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't know if it's clear.
Sorry.
The pandemic, I was like, what am I doing? Like all I've been able to like maintain is that I had submit, because it premiered in January, and so next thing you know, any of the other film festivals it would have shown at have gone online, and so it's shown online in a variety of film festivals. I'm going to continue to do that because that system is kind of set up and just rolling, and those conversations have been fruitful. But yeah, it just feels like you're actually making me think, like it feels like there could be something else for it, like maybe if it's not a film festival, maybe I have a few people who are showing it to students in their classes, fellow filmmaker teachers, and that feels like a step towards something, like getting the story out earlier, or like, because I was 30, how old was I? 37, 36. I had no idea like what was supposed to happen, and I was so ashamed that I felt really kind of stupid about it. And so I could make some efforts towards like, getting it out there as a more public message. And then it does tie a little bit. So I'm working on a feature film fiction script, but it's fiction overall, but it still involves a lot of personal stories in the main character, and a lot of them are medical related stories. This is the one medical story I don't use in the feature script, but it opened up this like ability for me to tap into that specificity, and like, because it's so nice to get so specific and so particular and tap into the emotions of medical situations, which are really universal regardless of what they are. And so there's a bridge there between, I don't know if I'd be writing this script if Spontaneous hadn't worked out the way it did.
That's interesting. I wasn't going to ask you that, what are you working on next question, because it breaks my heart when people ask me that. But what are you working on next?
Yeah, mostly this script is just like this summer, spending time really, working on the writing. Hopefully I would be making it in like 2022 or something like that. This would be the longest term. I mean, I have a documentary that took me like 7 years to make, but that's because like I didn't live near my subject and I was making short films during that time. This is going to be more like, I might put a lot of my energy into this, and then maybe, I make music videos sometimes, and I work on like commissioned projects when I get invited. I have a commission project now with an Australian sound artist where we're making a piece kind of about, ever-changing ecological landscapes and the Anthropocene, and we're collaborating. So I do the images, he does the sound, and we just started it and we're trying to figure that out. But those kind of things will probably be what I'm doing in the background as I try to get this feature off the ground.
That's really interesting. It's almost like what are your artistic options during quarantine, and what an interesting way to start collaborating with somebody across the globe,
It really, I mean, all we've done so far is have 2 Zoom meetings, and I'd never met him before. We were paired up through this organization, this Tora new music organization in Australia. I was invited to be a filmmaker. It was a nice email to get during quarantine. And we're paired up, and we've just had these long conversations about all this stuff. And it's so generative, like I feel like it's working both ways for us in general. So I think collaboration is going to be key, because it feels so stifling to try to generate stuff alone in my office.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, and I don't want to make a quarantine movie.
Right.
Like I don't mind making movies about the feelings of the pandemic, about like fear or loss or being stuck. Like I think all of that, I just don't want to personally, I don't want to directly like shoot myself wearing a mask.
Yes, understood. I think we're going to have a lot of that kind of content coming out of this anyway.